Hello everyone, welcome to another interesting and informative session of the Analyst brought to you by Vajiram and Ravi. In today's session, we will discuss 7 important articles as featured in the Hindu and Indian Express for your comprehensive understanding of the current affairs explained to you in the easiest language possible. The topics are as follows. From the analysis section, in the first topic, we'll try to understand the issues surrounding the thermal power generation in our country is specifically related to the sulfur dioxide emission. Then in the second topic, we'll try to learn about the two important articles of our constitution, Article 200 and 201, related to the governor's power over state bills and the federal concerns which emerges from them. Then in your simplified section, we'll not only try to simplify the news for you, but also provide you the much important value addition and practice question keeping in mind the approaching prelims 2025. So stay tuned. The chief editorial today highlights the shortcomings related to the controlling of the sulfur dioxide emissions from the thermal power plants and the steps which shall be actually taken to control this emission, a topic which forms an important component of your GS3 paper under the theme of environment pollution and degradation. So let's start our discussion by first understanding the context of the news, that what are these emission norms which were set for various kind of pollutants for thermal power plants back in the year 2015. So what has happened that in the month of December 2024, the Ministry of Environment actually issued a notification where it basically amended the environment protection rules by pushing back the deadline for thermal power plants to comply with this SO2 emission norms by another 3 years without citing any reasons. So what were these emission norms for these thermal power plants which were emitting this SO2? So the idea was that for about 20 gigawatts of thermal power plants, almost all of them which are actually located in the vicinity of the densely populated areas, such as for example the national capital territory of our country, the idea was that they have to kind of follow a certain emission limit for this sulfur dioxide by the date of December 31, 2024. But now this has been pushed to the year of 2027. So basically that means that these thermal power plants which are kind of emitting this sulfur dioxide in the vicinity of these densely populated areas, they can emit as much SO2 as they can want for another 3 years, that is by the year of 2027. What were these emission norms which were actually set up by the Central Pollution Control Board under the Ministry of Environment back in the year of 2015? The idea was to basically control 4 major pollutants, and these 4 major pollutants were your particulate matter, PM 2.5 and 10, your sulfur dioxide, your nitrous oxide, as well as your mercury. So what was the specific emission norm which was set up for this sulfur dioxide? So let's imagine that there is a thermal power plant which is basically running on a fossil fuel, such as for example coal. If that thermal power plant has a power generation capacity of less than 500 megawatt, then it can emit maximum of 600 mg per nm cube. However, if the thermal power plant has a capacity of more than 500 megawatt, then it can emit only up to 200 mg per nm cube. What we can interpret from this particular table? That if the power generation capacity of a thermal power plant is higher, then it will have to follow a much more stricter SO2 emission norms. That was the idea. So first of all, a question might be coming in your mind that why we actually need to set up a kind of an emission limit for this sulfur dioxide, or what high emission of sulfur dioxide can actually lead to. So if we refer to a report by the Center for Research on Energy and Clean Air, CREA, it basically kind of defined the sulfur dioxide as a toxic gas with a pungent smell, which can actually detrimentally impact the functioning of your lung, and over a period of time can also kind of lead to various kind of cardiovascular diseases, such as for example, it can lead to headache and anxiety. It can also impact your central nervous system. It can lead to, for example, irritation of your eyes, nose, throat, as well as cause several kind of breathing problem. One of the major concern with this sulfur dioxide gas is that when it actually gets mixed with ammonia or NH3 in the atmosphere, it actually forms a kind of a secondary pollutant matter, and that is PM 2.5, which can further lead to cardiovascular diseases. It can cause inflammation and infection in your respiratory system. It can further aggravate your asthma, reducing your lung function, as well as it can lead to lung cancer as well. It is this very same sulfur dioxide gas, when it is actually mixed with nitrogen oxide in the atmosphere, it actually leads to acid rain. The acid rain, which can actually kill plant life, it can pollute river and various kind of streams. So it can also, let's say for example, is detrimental to the health of the crops. So it can do what? It can basically kind of reduce our food security. At the same time, it can lead to the kind of a corrosion of building materials, paints, etc. So that can actually reduce the overall lifetime period of any particular building. And that will lead to what? Kind of an extra burden of expenditure on the middle class. Now, why as a country we shall be very much concerned about this SO2 emission? Because remember, back in the year of 2022, India was the world's top emitter of sulfur dioxide gas, with responsibility of around 20% of the anthropogenic SO2 emission which took place globally. Almost 1/5 of that came from our country. At the same time, if you look at the report by this KRIA, it actually tells us that thermal power plants actually end up emitting 240 times more sulfur dioxide than comparison to the stubble burning. Thus, we can say that it is one of the major air pollutant. So obviously, the Ministry of Environment took a cognizance of that. It said that, see, obviously we cannot completely eliminate these thermal power plants altogether because of the kind of high reliability which we have on these TPPs for power generation. Rather, what we can actually do, we can actually try to make these thermal power plants much more environment friendly, and for that purpose, installation of two technologies. One is your flue gas desulfurization technology, and the other is your circulating fluidized bed combustion technology that was suggested to be installed in these thermal power plants. Let's try to understand them one by one. What is this flue gas desulfurization? So what does we mean by this flue gas? Flue gas is basically the kind of particulate matter which is actually released when any kind of fossil fuel is burned. Fossil fuels as for example your coal, oil, natural gas, wood, etc. When we are burning them, we are basically releasing what? A kind of a very harmful poisonous gas, and that is called as flue gas. This flue gas is being released by these thermal power plants. So what we will do, we will install this FGD technology right at the exhaust chamber of a thermal power plant, let's say for example which is using coal to generate electricity. There we will be actually using some kind of absorbents such as for example your limestone slurry or gypsum, which will actually end up absorbing this SO2 particle or SO2 gas. And with this technology, we are actually capable enough to kind of absorb 95% of the sulfur dioxide emission. Thus, eventually the gas which will be coming out from this exhaust after the use of this FGD technology, that will be a kind of a clean gas. The next technology is your circulating fluidized bed combustion, which is a kind of a combustion technology. Here we do what? We first create a kind of a bed of, let's say, solid materials, like for example your coal and limestone. Then this solid bed material consisting of the coal as an input is actually fluidized by the high velocity air steam, where we are also using water as a vent in and vent out. And then this fluidized air, which also contains basically the kind of a flue gas, that is actually kind of circulated rapidly in the chamber, where we also use the fly ash recycle device and the dust collector. So eventually after this combustion, the eventual gas which comes out, that has very less SO2 intensity. The idea was that if you are going to use this FGD technology, as per the calculation by the Central Electricity Authority, let's say for example the calculation was that the SO2 annual emission which we do in our country as of year 2023, that was calculated to be around 4,327 kiloton annually. And by the use of this FGD technology, we can actually reduce it down to 1,547 kiloton. That means that with the use of this FGD technology, we can actually reduce SO2 emission almost by 64%. That was actually the idea. So the Ministry of Environment did what? It basically categorized the various thermal power plants into three categories for the installation of this FGD and CFBC installations. What are these categories? So the category A were basically the thermal power plants which are within the 10 kilometer of the national capital region, consisting of the high population density it has, and any particular city which has a population of more than 1 million. Then comes your category B. These are basically the cities within a 10 kilometer radius of any critically polluted area, which are also called as your non-attainment cities. Or in the category C, which basically contains of any remaining thermal power plant throughout the country. So the idea was that different deadlines were set for these three different categories. So as for example, the category A, the deadline was 31st of December 2024. What if the thermal power plants which are within the 10 kilometer radius of the NCR region or in any particular city where the population is more than 1 million, if these TPPs were not going to follow these SO2 emission norms, then on them a certain kind of penalty was going to be charged, which was around, let's say for example, 0.2 rupees per unit if you have not installed it for up to 6 months. If between 6 to 12 months also you have not installed, and if you are not following this SO2 emission norm, then the penalty will increase to 0.3 rupees per unit. And if the delay of installing such FGD technology and not following SO2 emission norm is more than a year, then the kind of a penalty which will be charged will be 0.4 rupees per unit. The idea was that, let's say if there is a thermal power plant which has a power generation capacity of more than 500 megawatt, and if that particular power plant will not comply to these SO2 norms for a period of up to 1 year, a hefty penalty of estimated 85 crore rupees will be charged upon them. So obviously such categorization and such heavy penalty might have acted as a kind of a detriment for these industries. They might have started following these SO2 norms to reduce down the harmful SO2, the harmful impacts of which we have already seen. But because these deadlines has been kept on pushing, as we saw in the today's editorial as well, obviously these industries are not following these norms seriously. And thus, as of November 2024, only 7% of the TPP in our country, which basically comes around 39 units in total, only they have installed any kind of flue gas desulfurization technology till now. The idea is that if they have not been following this, the editorial basically highlights several reasons for that. So what is this issue of the extension of the deadlines? Why the ministry keeps on increasing the deadline? First and foremost, the answer is the over-reliance on thermal power plant which we have. Such as, for example, if you look at our total installed power capacity as of November 2024, that basically stands at 456 gigawatt. Out of that, the thermal power plant, which are basically running on coal, they are generating 217 gigawatt of power, or for example 47% of the total installed capacity, and 71% of the power generation basically comes from coal-based thermal power plants. Then you guys can say that, sir, why we are not actually kind of putting much more impetus on renewable energy then? Why just not try to eliminate these thermal power plants altogether? The government is indeed working in that direction by installing various kind of, for example, the wind energy projects, your PM Surya Ghar Yojana, putting impetus on the installation of solar photovoltaic modules. All of that is being done. But we have to understand that even if you look, for example, the estimation which has been done for the future, the projected all India installed capacity by 2030 or 31, which is actually going to be declined. So let's say, for example, the kind of power generation which will be having from coal and lignite, that is actually going to come down as low as to 29%, and the solar energy will be constituting almost 40% at that point of time. The idea is that if we look at the current economy of installation, this is where the installation of renewable energy becomes a problem. Why? Because of the high installation cost, the installation infrastructure, the kind of long gestation period they have, where to actually become functional and earn any kind of profit, it can actually take up a lot of years. So that basically deter a lot of private investment in these kind of infrastructural projects. Then, for example, for the storage of this renewable energy, for their distribution network, there is another high amount of operational expenditure which takes place. That is why the kind of speed or the kind of velocity which you guys are expecting in the area of renewable energy, that is actually not coming into fruition. So for example, if we look at a kind of a cost comparison which we can do between solar energy and thermal energy, let's say for example in the year of 2022, to actually generate per kilowatt hour, it was taking 10.5 rupees for solar energy, and for a coal based power it was only taking 5.9, that is almost half of that. It will actually take us almost till the year of 2030 when the kind of cost of generating and storing solar power and coal based power, that will almost come at equal, and thus they will kind of become sustainable for us. So the kind of a high cost of solar energy is one of the reason as well. Then there are certain issues which actually lies with the installation of flue gas desulfurization technology. For example, as per the report by the Central Electricity Authority review report, it says that just to absorb 1 mole of sulfur dioxide by using this gypsum and lime, etc., it is actually kind of releasing 1 mole of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere as well. So basically we are kind of releasing greenhouse gas in the atmosphere, and that is basically leading to what? A kind of a global warming, and thus acting as a kind of a negative impact on our climate change effort. Second, if you look at the report by the Center for Science and Environment, it basically cites the lack of coordination which exists between Ministry of Power, Ministry of Environment and various thermal power plants about the kind of the technology adoption which we need to do in this FGD sector, how much FGDs are actually required, how much chimneys shall be actually covered to actually meet the emission norms. There is no defined criteria as such. Then obviously there exists a long gestation period and high installation cost as well, which are associated with this FGD technology. As well as, let's say for example, earlier the deadline was what? 31st of December 2024. So some of the thermal power plants might have procured this flue gas desulfurization technology and might have installed it as well. But now if the deadline has been further shifted to 2027, it basically means that they do not need to use this FGD technology. Why? To increase your expenditure cost. And over a period of time, they will eventually kind of pass on the procurement cost of this FGD technology to whom? To you as a customer. So basically you as a customer will end up paying for the installed FGD but the unused FGD. Then let's say for example, I am generating power as a thermal power plant. I am selling it to the power distribution companies. But there are a lot of debt which has incurred by these power distribution companies. So if they are in debt, obviously they are not going to pay me. So I don't have kind of an input supply of money to actually install this much of a technology. I am also running kind of a loss at this moment. So this delayed payment from DISCOMs, because they have legacy dues of rupees 610 billion and more than that, that is also acting as an issue. And then ultimately there exists kind of a no accountability mechanism on this central pollution and state pollution control boards, where there is no set mechanism to actually kind of review the emission norms by the various thermal power plants. At the same time, there has been a counter argument which has been come by the Center for Science and Industrial Research and the NIRI study which was done, which basically recommended against the installing of any such additional FGD system. Why? Because it argued that the SO2 emission norms are not that important to actually achieve good ambient air quality. Rather, it said that we shall put impetus on kind of reducing the particulate emission, which are much more harmful. But obviously they did not kind of take into the cognizance of the fact that if this SO2 is being mixed with ammonia NH3, it is basically leading to the formation of what? Particulate matter itself. At the same time, this CSIR study actually argued that the Indian coal has lower sulfur content. So basically they are saying that we should not actually, kind of do that kind of investment in this FGD technology. So basically the idea is that what are the steps which can be taken? First is obviously we need to kind of enforce the deadlines now, to have a binding timeline for this FGD installation across the sectors. Then obviously there shall be strict regulation, right? For example, imposing the penalties for delays in meeting any kind of installation targets which we have already set under the rules of 2015. Then there shall be a transparency and accountability mechanism, and for that purpose we can create a portal for regular updates on FGD implementation. And finally, we need to expand upon the CBFC technology as well, and we need to further invest in the research and development, because even in the budget 2025, the overall share of kind of expenditure on research and development has been kind of lower than 1% of the GDP. So that is obviously not a good sign. So just try to attempt this particular question on the basis of our discussion, and we move forward to the next news, where the Supreme Court has actually questioned the role of governors, specifically in the opposition-ruled states, to delay their assent or indefinitely sit on crucial bills which has been passed by the state legislature. This power of governor over the state bills actually forms an important component of your GS2 paper under the larger theme of governor and the various issues related to federalism. So we already know that the governor has been kind of established as the chief executive head of the state by the constitution itself under Article 153 of the constitution. But at the same time, we also know that governor only act as a kind of a de jure executive or nominal executive. The reason for that is that the real governance power actually lies with the Council of Ministers, which is basically headed by the Chief Minister of the state, which basically act as a kind of a de facto executive. Now, when the constitution makers were making the constitution, the original provision was that there shall be one governor for every state. But after the 7th Constitutional Amendment Act of 1956, now the same person can also be appointed as the governor of 2 or more states. So when it came to the kind of appointment method for the governor, our constitution makers, they adopted for a kind of a Canadian model where the governor is basically appointed by the central government. So remember that in our country, the governor is neither elected directly or indirectly by the people, like in the case of president, where he is indirectly elected by the people. How so? Because he is being elected by whom? By the elected representative of the people. However, the governor is actually appointed by the president under Article 156 Clause 1 of the Constitution by warrant under his hand and seal. That basically implies that he holds the office under the kind of wish of the president. So remember that Article 156 Clause 3 actually defines the term of office of governor to be 5 years from his appointment, but again that is completely subject to the kind of the president wish. And the president is working upon what? Upon the aid and advice of the Council of Ministers. So basically we can say that governor is basically acting in the state as a kind of a nominee of central government. So some of you might start wondering that, sir, that basically means that governor is nothing but the kind of extended arm of control passed by the central government to the state, or basically agent of the center. But if we look at the opinion of the Supreme Court in Har Govind Pant versus Raghukul Tilak judgment of 1979, the Supreme Court's answer was no. The Supreme Court held that if we look at the kind of the constitutional duties which has been provided to the governor, or kind of the functions which he performs in legislative and executive field, it can be said that the governor is neither an employee nor a servant of the central government, rather an independent constitutional body. So now some of you might be very inspired to actually become a governor. The question is, who can actually become a governor? There are only two kind of qualifications which has been laid down for the governor under Article 157 of the Constitution, which is as simple as that he shall be a citizen of India and he shall be at least 35 years of age. However, over a period of time, two conventions has actually kind of emerged for the qualification to become a governor. First of all, in whichever state you are being appointed as the governor, you shall be an outsider. That basically means that you do not belong to the electoral list of that particular state. But remember, there is a kind of a convention just to ensure that you are kind of free from the local politics. Second, the president, when he or she is appointing the governor in a particular state, he or she may consult with the chief minister. Remember, it is just a convention, not an obligation on the president to kind of compulsorily consult with the chief minister of the concerned state. So when we have understood the kind of the body and the kind of qualification of the governor, let's try to understand the legislative power of the governor under two important articles, Article 200 and Article 201. So let's say there is an ordinary bill and that bill is being given to the kind of the executive head of the state, that is president and the governor. So president under Article 111 and governor under Article 200 has a special power where only if they will give assent to the bill, that bill will eventually become the law. So when an ordinary bill is being passed by both the houses of the parliament and that bill is being presented to the governor, or if the bill has been passed by the state legislative assembly and has been given to the governor, they basically have three important options. One, they can give assent to the bill, so the bill will become an act. They can withhold their assent, they can say that no, I am not interested, the bill will collapse. Or they can return the bill for the reconsideration of the parliament and the state legislature respectively. Now, let's say for example, there was a bill, it was sent to the president. President again sent it back to the parliament for the consideration of the parliament, or governor sent it back for the consideration of the state legislature. If the state legislature or the parliament is again going to pass the bill and then give it back to the president, then under constitutional amendment, that is 44th Constitutional Amendment Act of 1978, any such reconsidered advice actually becomes binding on both president and governor. That basically means that now they don't have any choice, they will have to give assent to that particular bill and that bill will become the act. But under Article 201 of the Constitution, the governor has one additional power. That is, he can actually reserve the bill for the consideration of the president. Now, let's say for example, also try to discuss the money bill. So in the case of central government, it is Article 110. In the case of state legislature, it is Article 199. When a money bill goes to the president can give the assent to the bill, can withhold the assent to the bill, but remember that in the case of money, whenever the money comes, the president cannot send it for reconsideration. If I will give some money to you, whether you guys will reconsider, the answer is no. So why will president? Similarly, the governor also can have only two powers here: give assent to the bill or withhold his assent. He cannot send it for the reconsideration. But even in the case of money bill, which has been passed by the state legislature, the governor can reserve the bill for the reconsideration of the president. Now the idea is that what are the options which are kind of available with the president when a state legislative bill which was given to the governor and governor under Article 201 has reserved for her consideration. What are the options which are left with our president? So in the case of ordinary bill, she can give assent to the bill, she can withhold the assent to the bill, or she can just return the bill for the reconsideration of the state legislature. Remember that for president or for governor, because all of them have kind of a pocket veto, so there is no time limit as such which has been kind of applied on president or governor to act within certain time limit to give their assent or not. That's why they have a very large pockets. But when it comes to the reconsideration, when the president, there was a state bill which was given to the president, it was an ordinary bill, president kind of again sent it back to the state legislature for reconsideration. Now the state shall consider that bill within the time limit of 6 months. And in the case of ordinary bill, if it will be sent back to the president, now the idea is again it will become kind of what? Now it is completely the prerogative of the president to decide on that bill or not. It is not binding on him, just like the case of parliament. However, when it comes to the money bill, remember, even in the case of state legislature's money bill, president can only give the assent or withhold his assent, but cannot send it back for the reconsideration. Wherever money comes, we do not reconsider. Now the question arises that which are the kind of the bill which can actually be kind of held by the governor for the consideration of the president. What are the circumstances? Well, there is only one obligatory circumstances, that is that bill is kind of endangering the position of High Court in the state. Then there are certain non-obligatory circumstances, such as for example, if bill is against the provision of some constitution. Let's say for example, there is a bill which has been passed by the state legislature and that is violating kind of freedom of speech and expression under Article 19 of the Constitution. So the governor can say that no, I will send it for the consideration of the president under Article 201. Or for example, if it opposes any DPSP. So let's say for example, there is your Article 47 of the Constitution, which basically directs the state governments to actually kind of improve the status of public health. But there is a bill which has been passed by the state legislature, which is basically saying that we are going to completely eliminate the public funding of primary health care. So the governor can reserve that bill for the consideration of president. Or if there is a bill which is against the larger interest of the country or of grave national importance, or if it is dealing with the compulsory acquisition of property under Article 31A of the Constitution. The idea is basically that can we say that such provisions like larger interest of the country, grave national importance are of ambiguous in nature, and thus they are basically marked with kind of cloak of wide interpretation, and thus large scale misuse can be done, leading to the non-duality of power or the centralization of power. Just try to solve this particular question on whatever we have discussed till now. And when we talk about such power of the governor, it basically leads to various kind of emerging federal issues. For example, let's say for example there is a bill which was given to the governor. The governor has now a constitutional discretion under Article 201, which has been specifically provided to him by the constitution itself, that he can reserve this bill for the consideration of president. Why? Because of the kind of primacy which has been given to the union. So the idea is what? That this particular action which has been done by the governor, let's say for example the governor first kind of just did not give his assent to the bill, sat on the bill for 2 or 3 years and then sent it for the further consideration of the president. President can also set it for as much long as he wants. So the idea is what? There is no kind of immediate response which the state legislature can actually expect. So there is a kind of a delay in the governance which is actually taking place. Now, if such action of governor can actually be scrutinized in the courts or a judicial review can be applied on this, the answer is no, because they have been provided with immunity under Article 361 of the Constitution. That if there is any action which they have taken in their discretion, it cannot be questioned in any court. Then what happens? It actually leads to kind of indiscriminate use of pocket veto. So they actually sits on certain very crucial bills. For example, the Tamil Nadu governor, who was not just passing the NEET bill, which was repeatedly being passed by the Tamil Nadu Legislative Assembly. And that basically leads to what? Kind of delay in the speedy governance in the states. For example, if there is a very important public reform bill, such as for example in the Chhattisgarh, they were actually trying to pass a kind of a bill for the upliftment of the vulnerable section, but that was not being passed by the governor there. So that basically is leading to what? Delay in the speedy governance, and that is basically undermining what? The public mandate. Because they have kind of elected the state government for their welfare. So if the governor is sitting on such crucial bills, the governor is also undermining the public mandate or the public voice as well. Then, as we have already discussed, the kind of vague provisions which exist, it basically provides the governor with unbridled power, and that basically leads to what? A kind of a tussle between the central and the state government, thus undermining the principle of cooperative federalism. Also, in the recent years, we have also seen the governor trying to take the alternative lawmaking path. That is your ordinance making power under Article 213 of the Constitution. Thus kind of completely bypassing the deliberation stage altogether. And that's why the Center for Policy Research has actually kind of alleged that the governor's seat has actually kind of been emerging in recent year as a parallel seat of governance, specifically in the opposition ruled states, such as for example in West Bengal, the governor formed an anti-corruption unit there. That is basically an administrative body which is being created by the governor, not by the lawmaking body there, that is legislature. So that is basically kind of violating the separation of powers idea of Montesquieu. So what are the steps which has been actually suggested by various Supreme Court judgments and various administrative reform bodies? Let's try to have a look into that. Such as for example, in the Shamsher Singh case of 1974, the Supreme Court actually held that the discretionary power which has been given to the governor, that is a constitutional power and that shall not hinder the public mandate by any course. Or for example, in the Rameshwar Prasad versus Union of India, the Supreme Court actually held that the kind of immunity which has been provided by judicial scrutiny to these governors, that is not absolute, and if the action can be considered to be on the malified ground, then such judicial review can actually be applied. Then in the Nabbam Rabia 2016, the Supreme Court actually directed the governors to work on the aid and advice of the Council of Ministers under Article 163 of the Constitution. The Sarkaria Commission said that, let's say for example, if any such bill was reserved for the President under Article 201 of the Constitution, and if the President is withholding the assent, then at least the reasons shall be communicated to the states, as well as the governor shall be provided with a security of tenure so that they should not function under the pressure by the central government. Also, in the Punchi Commission basically held that there shall be a time period of 6 months for the governor and the president to actually decide on any kind of bills. As well as the governor shall actually uphold the dignity of the constitutional positions which they have been actually accorded with. So remember all of these suggestions. Do not forget to use them in this particular answer whenever you guys are attempting, and we move forward to the next news, where we are actually going to understand the appointment procedure for the vice chancellors with the recent regulations which has been brought by the central government in your University Grant Commission, which forms an important component of your GS2 paper. So let's first try to understand this debate around this new UGC regulation 2025. First of all, we have to understand that when the centralization process was taking place, specifically under the Indira Gandhi government, the 42nd Constitutional Amendment Act of 1976, it basically shifted the education from the state list to the concurrent list. Beside education, there were 4 other subjects which were shifted to the concurrent list. Can you guys actually comment that down in the comment box? The idea is that the newly proposed UGC regulation of 2025 has kind of sparked a debate regarding the appointment of vice chancellors. Now, how these vice chancellors are basically appointed? So remember, they are appointed by the chancellor of the universities, which we are going to study further. The idea is that for this purpose, a search cum selection committee or SSC is created. This search cum selection committee basically consists of what? It basically consists the nominee of the chancellor. It consists the member from the or for the chairman of the University Grant Commission, as well as the university's apex body. Then these people are basically going to recommend 3 members on, let's say for example, some kind of a merit search selection process, and out of those 3 members, the chancellor will appoint one particular person as the vice chancellor. The article is suggesting that the proposed changes threatens actually the kind of the federal principles. So we'll try to understand that. Let's first try to understand what is this University Grants Commission. So you guys can actually record that when the Anglicization process was taking place, which started with the English Education Act 1835, passed under the then law member Lord Macaulay and the then Governor General of India William Bentinck, who was the Governor General of India from 1833 to 1835. Then the second step of that particular Anglicization process was the Charles Wood Dispatch of 1854, which basically connected the idea of using English for the economy purpose, such as for example kind of educating a lot of Indians in English language so that they can serve as clerks in the company's administrative structure. The same Charles Wood Dispatch 1854 also kind of created a grant in aid system, where they basically said that, let's say for example, if you guys are running any Gurukul or Madrasa, if you guys are going to have the uniform curriculum which is being given to you by the British government, if you will follow the uniform school hours, if you will just teach your children what the Britishers want you guys to teach, the uniform books, the uniform curriculum, all of that, then only by the inspection of certain government inspectors, as for example Ishwachand Vidyasagar was also one of the inspectors, then you guys will get certain grant in it by the central government at that point of time, that was British government. And the same Charles Wood Dispatch system also ensured the creation of chancellors, which will be appointed in the centrally created universities, and these chancellors, as at that point of time was held, that will be appointed by whom? By the British government, a kind of a practice which we still kind of has carried as a colonial legacy. Through the very same Charles Wood Dispatch system, 3 universities were created in Calcutta, Bombay and Madras in the year of 1857. In these universities, the governor of presidencies at that point of time actually acted as the chancellor of these universities. The same method was also kind of proposed by the Sargent Report of 1944, and thus a University Grant Committee was created in the year of 1945, which after the independence actually evolved to a University Education Commission under S. Radhakrishnan. And finally, a University Grant Commission was created in the year of 1953 by Maulana Abdul Kalam Azad, who at that point of time was acting as Education Minister, and it was given a kind of a statutory status by the UGC Act of 1956, which basically ensures the kind of high level of academics in the various kind of universities as well as provide grants to them. Thus, remember that this practice of appointment of chancellors of these universities as by the central government is a kind of a colonial legacy. The same legacy which we have carried in the Central Universities Act of 2009, where remember that our president act as a visitor of any central university. And as a visitor, right, as the position of that, president appoints the chancellor of universities as well as vice chancellors, and he is also responsible for the inspection of academic and non-academic aspects of the university. Then there is a University Grant Commission regulation of 2018 which basically says that governor as the chief executive head of the state, because of the virtue of that position or ex officio, that person will act as the chancellor of the state universities as well. However, when he is acting as a chancellor of the state university, he shall not do that in the accordance with the aid and advice of the Council of Ministers under Article 163 of the Constitution, rather act independently without the aid and advice. Thus, governor as the chancellor of university appoints the vice chancellors, as we saw from the kind of the recommendation which is made by this search cum selection committee. Now let's say, for example, there is a kind of a dispute where, let's say, some state government comes up with some act they pass, and they say that no, the governor is not going to act as a chancellor. Rather, let's say, for example, we are going to create an independent body to select the chancellor of the state university. In that particular case, it is a law which is being passed by the state government. They can do that because education is in the concurrent list. But if there is a tussle between such State University Act or the UGC regulation, as per Article 254 Clause 1 of the Constitution, in case of conflict on concurrent list, which rule will prevail? The union law will prevail. Thus further, the central government, because of the power in concurrent list, has come up with a new regulation, where it has said that now the VC appointment process of state universities, giving chancellor, in most cases the governors, the right to constitute this search and selection committee which we have discussed. Wherein earlier what used to happen, that the state government used to play a pivotal role because of the apex body which was being formed by these universities. But under the draft, now the committee will comprise of 3 members, 1 nominee each from the chancellor and visitor, the UGC chairman, and the university syndicate or the senate. This committee will recommend a 3 to 5 candidates, from which the chancellor or visitor, that is president, with sole discretion will make the final appointment with sole discretion. So it removes the requirement for the VCs to have any kind of prior teaching or research experience, thus raising the fear of politicization. The draft rule also seeks to institutionalize contractual employment in higher education by actually removing the 10% cap, thus accelerating the contractualization of teaching position. Because it ends up permitting higher education institutions to actually recruit up to 10% professionals from industry, non-academic fields as professors of practice, fostering corporate influence in academia as well. And the trade basically kind of mirrors what? The ad hoc recruitment policy which the government is appointing to increase the employment, such as, for example, Agniveers in the military. Thus, even in the crucial schemes such as UGC grants for teacher, it has actually progressively shifted to the burden onto the state government, because today the state government bears 76% of the total expenditure on the education. The article basically highlights that even though the state governments are bearing the most of the expenditure, the kind of decision-making powers through the vice chancellor has been given to whom? To the governor. Because let's say, for example, the same kind of function is also being performed by the president as a visitor, where he appoints the chancellor of the universities. But when the president does that, he basically takes the cognizance of Ministry of Education as well, advice from them, forms a kind of a search selection committee which actually kinds of dwell with searching among the various experts in the field of academia to actually become the chancellor. But when the governor is acting in the state, obviously the governor is not going to comply with everything the state education department is coming with. So basically now there are kind of 2 authoritative bodies, 2 decision-making bodies. One is state education department, one is the governor. So basically governor, even though does not shares any kind of financial responsibility, also has a kind of a lot of administrative power. So basically power without any accountability. And if there is any tussle which is taking place between the state education department and the governor in the appointment of VC, that can actually lead to the delayed appointments, delay in giving degree to the meritorious students like you. Thus, there are various kind of precautionary measures which has been suggested in the various cases of the Supreme Court, such as, for example, in the Maruram versus Union of India 1980, it was held that the office of President and Governor actually are nothing but functional euphemism, and thus they should not dwell in hindering the federal principle by providing the state kind of an opportunity to appoint the chancellors or vice chancellors. Or, for example, the Sarkaria Commission 1988 actually recommended for the governor role as chancellor is nothing but statutory and not constitutional. That they shall not act in this case in discretion, and that was actually held by M.M. Punchi Commission as well. That in the appointment of vice chancellor, the governor shall actually listen to the aid and advice of Council of Minister. Then, when our current Prime Minister was acting as the Chief Minister of Gujarat, in the Gujarat University Bill 2013, which was actually brought by his party in the legislature, Gujarat legislature, they actually seek to remove the governor from the chancellorship power as itself. So, obviously, there are two federal issues which we have discussed, the governor power over state bills and the governor power to appoint the vice chancellors. All of these are actually federal issues. Remember them, try to use them in your answer, and we move forward to the next news, where we'll try to understand the appointment procedure for the ad hoc judges to the High Court. What is basically the context of the news? So, to actually address the kind of growing backlog of criminal cases, the Supreme Court on January 30 actually allowed the High Courts to appoint retired judges on ad hoc basis. Remember, retired judges, provided that they will now only hear the criminal appeals in the session court as a part of a branch which is or bench which is led by already a sitting judge. So they will be part of the bench and not head the bench. A bench of Chief Justice of India actually relaxed a rule. Remember this particular case that was set in the Lok Prahari judgment, Lok Prahari versus Union of India, which had limited such appointments to such a high court, such ad hoc appointments, where judicial vacancies exceeded 20% of the sanctioned strength. Why the Supreme Court has actually allowed for this provision? Considering the concept of justice delayed is justice denied. Just look at the kind of vacancies which actually prevails in Supreme Court, in High Court, in various district and sub-courts. Just look at the top 5 Indian states with highest backlog of cases. For example, the cases which are pending at district courts in Uttar Pradesh is around 53 lakhs, and the judges per million people population is only 10 or as low as 8 in West Bengal. Just look at the kind of the judges per million population in kind of developed countries like France and USA. Use all of this data whenever you guys are writing about the issues pertaining to judiciary. So what the government has said, the Supreme Court has said that now we are going to appoint ad hoc judges. Now remember that there are 3 kinds of judges which can be appointed. One is your additional judges. Remember, both additional and acting judges are actually appointed directly by the President. What are these additional judges? Additional judges are basically appointed where there is kind of an increase in the business of High Court. So let's say, for example, I'm a qualified person, qualified enough to become a kind of a judge of High Court. Can you guys just write down the qualification which is required for the High Court judge? So let's say I'm a qualified for that. I will be appointed as a kind of an additional judge when there is an increase in the business of High Court for temporary period which shall not exceed 2 years. Or what can happen that let's say again I'm a qualified person. I can be appointed as an acting judge of High Court when the current judge of High Court is unable to perform its duty due to the absence or any other reason. Again, I am being appointed by whom? By the President. Both of these people, additional and acting judges, are people which are basically qualified enough to become a judge, and they can hold the office until the permanent judge resumes the office. Both cannot hold the office after attaining the 62 years of the age. But when it comes to the ad hoc judges, these are already the people who have crossed this particular age because they have already kind of retired. Thus, these ad hoc or retired judges, there was a kind of amendment which was done to the Constitution, that is 15th Amendment or Act of 1963, which basically kind of introduced an Article 224A, and a kind of a rule was set under the Memorandum of Procedure 1998, where it was said that let's say I'm a retired judge, I have done my duty for High Court, I am chilling at home. But let's say, for example, there is some emergency, there is some rising cases in High Court, for example, as we saw, such a large number of vacancies. So in that particular case, the current Chief Justice of High Court can actually request me to come for a temporary period and act as a judge, to become the part of the bench. Remember that when this Chief Justice of High Court is going to request me, obviously he requires my assent, but before requesting, he requires the previous consent of the President already. Then whatever the allowances I will be getting, that will be determined by the President order. And I will be having the same power and privileges as a sitting High Court judge, but I will still not be deemed to be as a judge of High Court. Remember this. So remember the classification between additional, acting and ad hoc judge when such appointments are actually made. So the court has outlined in the Prahari case several trigger points for such appointments. It is not compulsory, just a kind of a guideline that if these 4 things are happening, then such ad hoc judges can be appointed. When? If the vacancy in the High Court actually exceeds 20% of its action strength. If cases in a specific category have been pending for more than 5 years, for example, in this case, criminal cases. If more than 10% of the High Court cases are pending for over 5 years. Or if the case disposal rate is actually lower than the rate at which new cases are being filed, that means the case clearance rate. Why the Supreme Court actually had to take this decision? So the Chief Justice of India said that there are 62 lakh pending cases across high courts according to the data from National Judicial Data Grid. Of this, over 18.2 lakh are actually criminal cases, while more than 44 lakh are actually civil cases. So to tackle with this growing pendency, the court decided to set aside the condition which was actually laid down in the Lok Prahari judgment, which permitted the appointment of ad hoc judges only when judicial vacancies exceed 20% of the section strength. Remember that the ad hoc judges can now hear, as per the rule, only criminal appeals, and additionally the number of ad hoc judges cannot exceed 10% of a High Court sanctioned judicial strength, meaning in each of the High Court only 2 to 5 of such ad hoc appointments will be made. So remember these 4 criteria, remember the difference between an acting and an ad hoc judge, and we move forward to the next news, where we will try to understand the concept of the intensification of marine heat wave which has taken place. The reason for that, as per the NGO Climate Central report, is the global warming induced climate change. So why we are talking about this marine heat waves? Because very recently the death of more than 30,000 fish off the coastal Western Australia took place, where the report actually claims that the sea surface temperature has actually surpassed more than 2 degrees Celsius. And this is the second most intense marine heat wave in the region of Australia after the year of 2011. So what are marine heat waves? Marine heat waves actually occur when the sea surface temperature of a particular region, it actually rises to more than 3 to 4 degrees Celsius above the average temperature for last 5 days. Remember that. And these marine heat waves, remember, are not kind of a short occurring phenomena, because they can occur for or last for weeks, months, or even years. In recent years, as per the journal Nature, they have become much more longer lasting, much more frequent and intense. For example, if you look at the IUCN data, these marine heat waves had increased by 50% over the past decade. And what are the causes of this? So if you look at the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change 6th assessment report, the climate change, the kind of a global warming which has taken place from the pre-industrial level, so already the temperature has risen 1.3 degrees Celsius above the pre-industrial level. And 90% of this heat which has been increased, it has been actually absorbed by the ocean, thus kind of leading to the rise of sea surface temperature of around 0.9 degrees Celsius globally. The article today basically suggests that if there is going to be increase of 1.5 degrees Celsius, that is the kind of target which we have set under the Paris Agreement, then there will be 1/16 factor increase in the sea surface temperature. That will eventually lead to what? The weakening of Atlantic meridional overturning circulation. So for example, there is a kind of a Gulf Stream which actually goes, let's say for example, to the much more northern European area. And that basically kind of balances the temperature there. At the same time, the cold current from there, the Canaries current, it actually comes down. And when it comes down, it actually provides the relief to the much hotter area of the tropical region in the northern Africa. But now, let's say for example, if the sea surface temperature is going to increase like so further, this overturning will weaken. So can we say that the northern part of Europe will become much more colder and the northern part of Africa will actually become much more hotter? At the same time, it will lead to much more El Nino events, thus can lead to much more drought events in our country, impacting our food security. Even just look at the Indian Ocean warming, that how till the year of 2020, from 1950, the temperature has increased by 1.2 degrees Celsius, but now after that, it is actually going to increase 3.8 degrees Celsius per century. Correct? And what that can actually lead to. So let's say, for example, in the normal condition, this is exactly the overturning which we are talking about. In the normal condition, when the kind of water has a normal temperature, so there is a kind of an long outgoing long wave radiation. There is an evaporation which is taking place. There is a lot of large amount of cloud cover. But if the water has become actually kind of really hot, that will lead to increased advection condition. That will lead to what? Decreased evaporation. Why? Because of the high outgoing long wave radiation. And that will lead to what? Weakening of wind and low cloud cover and thus lesser precipitation. Just look at the impact of these marine heat waves in the Indian Ocean. Let's say, for example, if this particular area of northern Africa is actually going to kind of become really hot, then the low pressure area will be formed here. In comparison to that, in the coastal area of our country, there will be high pressure. So that will lead to the weakening of monsoon. Right? Again, less precipitation condition. And this marine heat wave will eventually lead to what? The rise in sea level, and that will eventually impact what? It will eventually impact our coastal cities. Just look at the data which has been provided here for the increasing sea surface level as well over the centuries. Thus, this marine heat wave is leading to extreme weather, increased ocean status, for example, ocean acidification and deoxygenation, leading to biodiversity and habitat loss as well as economic loss as well. So just try to note down all of this important data for your answers. A lot of statements can be made here for the prelims examination as well. And we move forward to the next news, where we are actually going to read about a national park which has actually featured in the news. Why? What is the context? So the idea is that this oil or Oil India Limited, which is basically a public sector unit, that was denied permission to explore and extract oil and gas under the Assam's Dibru Saikhowa National Park. Right? Earlier it was denied. But now the Ministry of Environment has actually given a permission to carry out such exploration, but only for the research and development study. The Forest Advisory Committee has actually had a view that such research and development activity is allowed purely for the research purposes. This PSU, that is oil, is actually claiming that we are only going to use the extended reach drilling technology. What is this technology? So let's say, for example, this is the area of national park. Normally, if let's say I'm going to do the exploration, I'm going to kind of disturb the surface here. But in this extended reach drilling, actually, I'm going to kind of start my research from outside the national park. I will take a kind of let's say a long pipe for extraction or a long tube for extraction, and that will then horizontally go under, thus not disturbing the biodiversity which exists on the surface. But the article highlights that there is still, there is a kind of a concern about oil spilling. So this Dibru river, which is connected to the Brahmaputra river, oil spilling can actually take place, and that can actually disturb the habitat of Brahmaputra. Even the Supreme Court judgment in 2006 and 2023 actually kind of completely banned the mining activity in these national parks or protected areas as a kind of an extension of the T.N. Godvarman judgment. And in 2023, it further said that any area, even 1 kilometer around the national parks, the minings cannot take place there. So what are the activities which are basically permitted inside the national park? Remember that as per the definition by Chapter 4 of Wildlife Protection Act 1972, no human activity is permitted inside national park except the ones which are permitted by the Chief Wildlife Warden. So even livestock grazing, which is kind of allowed in the region of wildlife sanctuaries, that can be prohibited in the national parks. So let's have a very quick insight on these national parks, keeping in mind you're approaching prelims 2025. Which is the first national park created in our country in the year of 1936? That is the Jim Corbett in Uttarakhand. Which state has the highest number of national parks? That is Madhya Pradesh. Can you guys comment in the comment box which union territory has the largest number of national parks in our country? The hint has been provided in this slide itself. Which is the largest national park in our country? That is Hemis National Park in the UT of Ladakh. The smallest national park is your Button Island National Park in Andaman and Nicobar, and the state which has no national park, the only state to exist, that is Punjab. Currently, we have around 106 national parks, which basically covers 1.23% of the area of our country. Correct? Remember that all the national parks which exist in the various state has been given to you in this picture. Just create a list of all the important ones. Remember, if it can come in the match the following section. In the state of Assam, there are 7 important national parks: Kaziranga, Manas, Dibru Saikhowa, Orang National Park, Dehing Patkai, Nameri and Ramona. In this session, we are going to focus specifically on Dibru Saikhowa, which is basically bounded by Brahmaputra and Lohit in the north and Dibru River in the south. Remember that if the statement asks you that which is the largest salix swamp forest in the northeast, it is basically Dibru Saikhowa, which is kind of having semi-evergreen and the mixed deciduous kind of fauna. And here you guys can find a rare species which is white-winged wood duck. Remember, it is critically endangered in the IUCN list. You guys can also see here gangetic dolphin. Can any one of you comment that what is the IUCN status for gangetic dolphin in our country? And you can also find various other kind of very prominent and salient fauna there, that is water buffalo, parrotbill, tiger, feral horses and the capped langur. So remember all of these important details, comment down the answers and we move forward to the last news, where we are actually going to talk about this very important port of Chabahar, considering it as a news of national importance. So if we read in detail about Chabahar, the region in Iran, obviously before the partition, we were actually quite close in the vicinity of this particular region of Iran. So much so that there was a kind of a Persian translation of our ancient Sanskrit book called as Panchtantra, called as Kalile va Dimna, which used to be quite famous in this particular region of Chabahar in Iran. Can any one of you tell me who actually wrote Panchtantra? Now, with the Delhi Declaration of 2003, under the Atal Bihari Vajpayee government, it was decided to develop this particular port of Chabahar as the kind of extension of the International North-South Transport Corridor, that is INSTC, connecting India to the Central Asian region and South Africa. Then, the region of your Russia. Then comes your Jaranj-Delaram Highway, right, which basically connects the Afghanistan and the Central Asia as well. So that's what we were connecting from this region of Jaranj to the Delaram in Afghanistan. And in the year of 2016, we also actually kind of envisaged to create the Shahid Beheshti terminal in this Chabahar port itself, to actually counter this Gwadar port which is being developed by China under the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor. But then comes the fateful year of 2018, where USA actually pulled out of this JCPOA, right, which was a kind of a deal to actually kind of regulate the kind of use of uranium, to actually kind of reduce down the nuclear stockpile by the Iran. And it actually pulls out from that deal and started putting sanction against Iran. So by the year of 2020, India actually zeroed the oil imports from Iran, and the kind of development which were taking place in Chabahar, that were stalled as well. But as of the year of 2024, India has again kind of rejuvenated the relations with Iran and has signed a 10-year contract for this development of Chabahar port, which is very critical for us to actually take our trade in the Central Asian region. Beside Chabahar in Iran and Gwadar in Pakistan and Hambantota in Sri Lanka, there are certain other major important ports. All of them actually forms the part of the India Middle East Europe Economic Corridor. Remember these ports because this can actually feature in your prelims examinations. This is, for example, Jebel Ali in United Arab Emirates, Dammam and Ras Al Khair in Saudi Arabia, Haifa in Israel, Piraeus in Greece, Messina in Italy and Marseille in France. So remember all of these important ports. And with this, we have reached to the end of our discussion today. Do not forget to attempt the questions at the end of the video and test your knowledge. We will meet in a very interesting discussion very soon. Till then, all the very best for your preparation and thank you.